Hello folks, I thought I'd do something a little bit different from a weekly update this week and take a little unscripted look at the announcement of the next midnight patch 12.07, which is called Revelations. Because this is unscripted and I'm going to try and do it in near enough one take, there might be a little bit more umming and ahhing and a few bits of silence, as this is pretty much the first time I've tried to do something like this, so do bear with me. But anyway, without further ado, let's jump into the new content. And first up, get ready for a showdown. Facing the forces of the Void in Void Assaults and Ritual Sites isn't enough to stop their machinations. To cut the threat off at its source, you'll need to hunt down the leaders behind those brutal attacks on Azeroth. Track them through a portal in Void Storm, leading to two new locations, Nightau and Val. I'm not sure if Nightau's the right pronunciation, but I'm going to go with that anyway. That's a fungal, arcane-rich world now occupied by an insidious, ethereal faction known as the Hal Hadar. And Val, an icy world once inhabited by the Legion, where the Dominar Imperator Pertinax has established his bastion of power. The portal to these worlds is unstable and switches destinations every few days, bringing a rotating set of challenges and experiences. Players can undertake world quests, defeat rare enemies, take part in events, and ultimately have a showdown with the leaders as world bosses. So, the moment I read this, it immediately jumped into my mind that this sounded an awful lot like the Legion invasion points. If you're not familiar with what they are, back in Legion patch 730, the invasion points were essentially scenario-based events where you could go through in a portal to one of the worlds that the Legion was attacking to disrupt the Legion forces. And sure enough, Nightau and Val were two of those locations. Now, I did have a little chance to take a look at these on the PTR, although it never occurred to me to record that, unfortunately. But they are indeed the original Legion invasion point maps, but in a much expanded form. Both of these areas have essentially extensions to the original Legion layout, which make pretty heavy use of existing assets from Midnight and other parts of the game. And unlike the Legion invasion points, these are not scenarios. They are open world feeling experiences where you'll be able to do quests, bonus objectives, world quests, rares, treasures, all of the usual stuff. And indeed, the final bosses are as strong as world bosses, which does mean that you will need a 40-man raid group to take them down. I had a go at that on the PTR shortly after the PTR went live, when virtually nobody was on the PTR. So as you can imagine, I get kind of stuck at the world boss. But overall, I think this is pretty smart reuse on the part of the developers. The narrative framing of it is basically that those attacks in the Void incursions and the Void strikes are basically denizens of the Void attacking Azeroth who are not fully allied to Xal'atath, but are instead kind of just taking the opportunity when it's presented to them now that Xal'atath has punched an opening into Azeroth. And this will see us going to their bases on other worlds and dealing with them. The fact that those bases are on worlds previously attacked by the Legion, well, you can probably work out what the narrative framing of that's going to be. Most likely it's a power vacuum that was left behind when we destroyed the Legion, and the Void jumped in and took advantage of it. But I mean, for me, these look like pretty decent content. I like that they're more of an open world experience. Neither of the maps are particularly large. I'd say they're maybe about half or slightly smaller than the Siren's Isle was, but we are getting two of these. We haven't been able to explore the switching destinations yet, so I am wondering if that means that there's more sections of the map to be revealed, or if that just means we'll be zoning in a different place, or maybe we'll zone in the same place, but the enemies will change or that. So that's something certainly to keep an eye on. Reward-wise, it's too early to get a really good handle on that, but there is a new transmog recolor set, and they do drop those field accolades, so this might well turn out to be a bit of a replacement for the Void Assaults, which will probably be done with by the time 10.07 starts. Anyway, next up, gain new power with the Omnian. Oh, before I move on, there is one very interesting thing about these two new zones, and that is that when you go through the portal into the new zones, you get a pop-up which looks very much like the Delve pop-up and allows you to select a difficulty level, and it offers you normal and heroic difficulty, which basically means that this is another little experiment by the Blizzard devs on that idea of a heroic world tier. So if you want a bit more of a challenge in your open world experience, these might well be for you. But okay, let's get on to the next one. Gain new power with the Omnian Folio. Join Magister Umbric and Grand Magister Romith on a mission to reconfigure and restore the Sunstrider Omnian, the ancient elven relic that was originally created by Dathramar Sunstrider to study and observe the various schools of magic and to serve as an academic repository. After years of silence, the Sunstrider Omnian has now reawakened, unsettling the Magisters and sowing disarray among them. Once unlocked, you'll be entrusted with the Omnian Folio, a runic ledger containing powerful runes of power that you can use in battle. Continue taking part in weekly activities to imbue more runes, customizing these initial runes and unlocking the maximum potential to aid you in your fight against the Void. Now, this is obviously our end of season borrowed power, but this time around, the folio is not going to be an item that will be replacing some of your gear in any of the gear slots. It's basically a console, and it's very similar to that Void console over in the Void Storms base area, where essentially every week we'll get a quest. That quest will give us a point that we can spend in a mini talent tree, and we'll gain power from that. Initially, it looks like the early steps involve getting a bunch of extra primary stat and then your choice of secondary stats. As a piece of borrowed power, it looks like it's going to avoid that issue that we're quite familiar with from the bad old days, where the borrowed power was fine, but the acquisition was terrible. By acquiring it through a weekly quest, I think it's going to be very similar to the Sussy Circlet or Titan Dispel, in which obtaining your weekly upgrade won't be too bothersome, so it shouldn't annoy too many people. The big question is this just going to be limited to the current patch, or is this something that would extend beyond that patch into the next season? I'm hoping it will just be limited to 12.07, because I think the less time we have a piece of borrowed power, the easier it is to lose it at the end of the day. One of the problems, I think, with Legion and BFA was you have the borrowed power for the entire expansion. You get so used to having it that when you have to give it up, it really hurts. So, yeah, this isn't something that I think will be a major issue, and it could well give at least some of us a reason to log in and keep powering up. Okay, new raid, Sporefall. Sporefall is a single boss raid located in Harrendar, where you'll face the fungal giant Rotmire. The raid will be available in Raid Finder, normal, heroic, and mythic difficulties. For this raid, we're also trying something new for mythic difficulty, which is flexible groups of 15 to 25 players. And that appears to be not the only new thing they're trying, as the early indications are that the gear from this raid across all difficulties is going to be warbound until equipped gear, meaning that you'll be able to trade the gear to your alts. Yes, just like that, think in yes, just let that sink in for a little moment. Mythic tier Warbound until equip gear. That could be quite interesting. Now, that does come with a big caveat. This is the PTR. Things do change in the PTR. That Warbound gear could just be a bug that Blizzard fixes, or it might be something they change their mind about. So don't set your heart on getting it. But I think it might make sense to do that because a lot of people are going to have a lot of gear, especially Myth Track gear, by the time this raid comes out. And, you know, a single boss raid probably isn't going to take that long to clear. So it could be a nice way of getting an extra piece of gear every week for our alts. And that might well be how Blizzard plan to life extend this patch. Okay, next up, go lore working with the lore. Experience the lore of the lore with assistant lore worker Lily. You'll dive deeper into the stories of the Zandalari, Drakari, Gurubashi, and Darkspear trolls. So we all know the format of lore walking by now. This is basically a compendium of greatest hits, old quest lines, usually with a new quest line or scenario added on at the end. Although this doesn't necessarily promise that new quest line, but I'd be surprised if they don't. Now, one thing, if you're a deep lore fan, Chen Stormstout's niece, isn't it? I believe Lily Stormstout is going to be the assistant lore walker, who my understanding of the framing of this is that she's temporarily trying it out as a potential career. So it's not necessarily the case she'll be the new lore walker for all of these quests going forward. And I do kind of like the idea that Lily is, now that she's effectively a panda teenager, she's out in the world trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. So I do wonder if we'll see more of Lily popping up in random places over time. Okay, next up, help Loa speaker Breck hatch Janalai's new eggs. With the return of Janalai, Loa of Fire, comes a return to past traditions. She's ready to bring a new clutch of eggs into the world, but Loa speaker Breck requires assistance with the ceremony and with ensuring all the Loa's young are released safely from their eggs. Be a part of welcoming the first of her offspring and protecting them as they take their first steps. So this is, I think, pretty obviously meant to take the same place as the spearfishing event does at the moment, which is a piece of side content which isn't super connected to anything, but you can do if it's something that appeals to you. There isn't a lot of details about what's involved in this at the moment. I haven't had a chance to look into it yet. I'm quite intrigued by it, and I think it could be quite cool. And then begin the next chapter with Zul'Jan. When the Harinir call for a special gathering, Zul'Jan attends as the Amani representative, only to be drawn into an ancient mystery surrounding the legacy of the Amani trolls. Join him and his uncle Kinduru on their journey of discovery to uncover the truth. This content will alive after the release of the update. So this is basically the campaign storyline, and it will be the prologue for the patch 12.10 story. In the in-game UI, it's presented as having 5 chapters, but only the first chapter seems doable. So what I think's happening is that first chapter is all we're going to get in this patch, with the rest of it coming in the next patch. And this chapter, it pretty much is confirmed just from the context that we will be going to that mysterious island or continent area that's off the shores of Zulaman. So the speculation that that was going to be the 12.10 zone has been borne out. There isn't really a lot more to say about this other than this key piece of wording here, that the content will arrive after the release of the update, or in other words, it's going to be time gated and will turn up some point through the patch rather than right at the start. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm not a massive fan of Blizzard's pacing of the story. I often think that they chop the story into chunks that are far too small and then put them out once a week in a way where we struggle to remember the story from week to week. And I think that does make the story feel a lot more incoherent on live. Certainly when you compare it to the experience on the PTR, where you can often go through it in one go. But at the same time, in this case, if it's just a single chapter and it's coming out a bit later, I don't necessarily mind that. Moving it a little closer to the next patch's story might well help the story a little bit. Next up, Turbulent Time Waste returns. Turbulent Time Waste returns with new rewards, including a new mount, Spawn of Viranoth, and adds 6 Dragonflight dungeons to the rotation. Yes, Dragonflight time walking already. Now, I have to admit that this does feel very soon for Dragonflight time walking, but it's actually not. If you look back in the past, Blizzard pretty much always added a new time walking expansion every expansion, so to speak. So this really is around about the time you'd expect to get this, although normally it'd be a little later in the expansion. But, you know, we're only talking about it being a few months early. I don't necessarily hate this. Time walking is super popular, especially for leveling. I'm not the biggest fan of it myself. I normally just do like one time walking a week when it's up for the mount. Obviously, with Turbulent Time Waste, it's probably going to be back to doing the 4 time walking dungeons every week for 5 weeks. As you can guess from what I just said, not a huge fan of that, but I'll be doing it for the mount. It's an interesting model, which I kind of like a lot. And I'm sure there'll probably be other time walking mounts on the vendor for Dragonflight as well. As for the lineup, it's Algathar Academy, Halls of Infusion, Notharis, Ruby Life Pools, Azure Vaults, and Brackenhide Hollow. There's no sign of the Nockadon Hold dragon riding dungeon there. That kind of makes sense. I'm not sure how well that would have worked in time walking. So I think this lineup's fair enough. Next up, new micro holiday Darkspear Dash. Join the Darkspear trolls and their Zandalari allies as they race from Echo Isles to Silvermoon City for an in-game event inspired by the running of the Trolls community event. Prepare to run, leap, and spread rainbow cheer along the route. Now, this very much feels to me like it's going to be very similar to the Great Nomnagron run that we get. I think it's in early November or early October every year. That event's pretty chill. It doesn't take long to do, and it's kind of fun. Having another version of that for the Horde, I think, could be pretty interesting as well. The fact they're racing from Echo Isles to Silvermoon City does make me wonder how they're going to cross the sea. For the Great Nomnagron run, you run from Nomnagron into Ironforge, and from there you take the tram to Stormwind and then down to Booty Bay. So I'm guessing you'll probably take one of the boats at some point to get over. I certainly hope that, well, it'll be a Zeppelin in the case of the Horde, but I certainly hope that they'll do that. And finally, there's more user interface updates, which is additional quality of life updates to raid frames, damage meters, and more. Now, that is available on the pre-patch notes. So, boss timeline in the vertical orientation now has an option to set text to be in the left or the right. That's just a basic little tweak. Adjusted colors for gaining threat and high threat on raid frames and nameplates. I personally don't use the default nameplate, so I don't have a big opinion on that. Added a new option to enable or disable spell alert glows for special procs when having the single button assistant on the action bar. The Great Vault Raid Tooltip now displays credit for multiple raids in a better format. That is definitely needed. It's really confusing. I think for a lot of people who don't read Wowhead to figure out exactly what rewards what on the raid row in the Great Vault. For damage meters, added an in-group visibility option. I'm guessing that means that you can get your damage meter to appear or disappear based on whether you're in a group, which I kind of like. I did try and explore that in the PTR, but didn't really get anywhere. So I guess it's still to be added on the PTR, or maybe I'm just not smart enough to figure it out. Lowered the minimum window size, allowing you to make the damage meter window smaller than before. Yeah. Shift clicking a damage meter row now opens a details window that stays open until manually closed. And during PvP activities, damage meter bars are now a different color for allies versus enemies. If the show class colors option is enabled, a faction icon is shown instead. I think that's all pretty decent, nice little tweaks. The personal resource display is now much more customizable. New options include controlling the overall size, bar width, health bar height, power bar height, padding between bars, opacity, and visibility, with options of always in combat and hidden. The health bar and power bar can now be hidden separately instead of the previous single option that hid both at once. Added options to hide the class resource bar, combo points, soul shards on the personal resource display and player unit frame. Added a new show class color checkbox, which changes the health bar to the player's class color instead of the default green. Now, this is a major improvement in my view. One of the reasons that I wasn't super keen on the default user interface is that lurid green bar. Having class colors is probably the main USP that pushes a lot of players to use non-default unit frames. So having that in game, I think, is a not before time moment. Added a new show bar text checkbox, which enables numbers on the health bar, power bar, and alternate power bar. Another nice basic thing. The personal resource display has been updated with new art, and a few personal resource display bugs have been fixed for augmentation evokers. Overall, these are all nice little tweaks. I would have liked to have seen a personal resource display option for a more minimalistic layout. I think that some of the personal resource displays in the default UI are really fussy. They do look good for a new player, but I think for experienced players, we want something much simpler, like just a basic, like weak order style bar. And I'd have liked to have seen the devs add that. Beyond that, I'm a little disappointed that there's still no word on better filtering for the unit frames. I think that's a major sore point in the user interface. I get that it adds more complexity to the user interface setup, but one of the problems that WoW has overall is information overload, and we do need more and better tools to reduce that information overload and make it a lot easier for us to follow the information in our UI and to only see the stuff that matters to us. Now, another little update is for housing. Lighting is now available outdoors. Well, actually, it's available right now. I have lights outside my house. So I assume what they mean is more extensive use of lighting, because the number of lighting items you can place outside at the moment is tiny. So I assume this is just making it a bit more extensive. You can now add lights to your plot. Lighting decor will have certain restraints outdoors that they do not have indoors. So that makes sense. In public areas, if every house is festooned with lights, the devs do need to be careful about the performance of the game, and I bet you that's what these restrictions are for. So 2 lights cannot overlap and will become unplaceable when too close. Light indicator radius visuals will appear when the lights are too close and will turn red when overlapping. Over 100 new common decor can be found on existing neighbourhood vendors. No an issue, we're aware of the floor changing bug and looking to hotfix it in the near future. That has now been fixed, thank goodness. I do think that the team should have been a bit more proactive in communicating this. This is literally the first time we've seen it really being formally discussed. It's ironic that came mere hours before they fixed it, but here we go. Yeah, it's some nice wee quality of life tweaks for housing. The one thing that is missing, and I have checked in the PTR, and it's not a thing in the PTR, is an extension to our housing levels. I think a lot of players have capped the housing levels. One consequence of which is that it really feels like endeavors are kind of pointless at the moment. Yeah, I know you can still store up housing XP for the future, but I've no idea if that'll hit a cap at some point. I do worry it will, because I think it'd feel pretty awful if you hit that cap and then you're getting new decor items and you lose out an extra housing XP. So I personally would have liked to have seen more housing levels being added. I think there's a very real... No, I wouldn't even say it's a real risk. I think it is going to run out of momentum before the 12.10 patch, which realistically would be the next time we might see more levels being added. And I think that running out of momentum's a shame, because it'll pretty much kill off endeavors. Endeavors for me haven't been the strongest of content in housing, and they're very rapidly becoming a thing that I can just ignore, which will make it pretty hard to come back to them if those housing levels in the future mean that I need to. So yeah, I think this is basically just a pacing issue with the housing that the team aren't doing a great job on. Okay, items. I'm not going to read all of this out. The basic TLDR is that if you were involved in collecting the luminous dust for the moths in Harandar, which leads to some nice rewards, including a couple of mounts, there is a bug where some players got stuck just one short of the maximum and therefore can't get the mount, which is pretty rubbish. Blizzard have had a couple of swings at fixing that and they've not succeeded. So the TLDR of this is basically they're giving up on the Luminous Dust collection and turning it into a quest-based system, which will allow affected players and also future players to be able to get those rewards without so much pain. So if you're one of those people that's affected by that, some good news down the line for you. Okay, now on the PTR, there are a couple of other small discoveries that is worth talking about, I think. One of those is that ritual sites are going to be getting an extra tier 6. And that tier will reward myth crests from the end of ritual site chest, which is quite nice, I think, for solo and delve players who have been feeling the significant reduction in myth crests that have been dropping from those bountiful delves. Unfortunately, this tier 6 is going to give exactly the same rewards in the Great Vault. So I have a feeling that if you don't really need myth crests, this might feel a little bit pointless. A tier 6 ritual site is going to require you to have all of the challenges active, so it's going to be a little bit in the slow side. But if you're looking for a major challenge, I guess it could be quite appealing. There's also some indications in the data mining. This isn't live in-game at the moment yet, so do treat this with a bit of caution. But there could also be a third ritual site set in Harandar called the Blinding Bloom. And the other little discovery is data mining, and I suspect probably won't see it in this patch, but we might see further down the line, and that's a possible additional lore walking scenario based around Thrall, which, if that is going to happen, probably means that Thrall is going to be playing a bigger part later on in the expansion, which will be interesting to see. And finally, of course, the usual question is, when will we all get our hands on this? So, assuming Blizzard stick to their 8-week release cycle, and I think it's very likely that they will, This will be coming out around about the 16th of June in North America or 17th of June in Europe. Anyways, that's it for my update on this patch. Do let me know if you like this much more unscripted format, if you found it more informative, or even a bit more fun for a bit more of an off-the-cuff reaction. But regardless of whether you like it or not, do remember to hit that like icon. It does make a massive difference. And if you want to see more of my videos, hit that subscribe button. I'm also streaming on Twitch 3 days a week, Wednesday, Saturday and Sunday, and you'll find a link to my Twitch stream down below. And hopefully you'll join me there as we explore Midnight together. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.